I never expected my life would change because of old people and their damn crossword puzzles. But there I was, every Tuesday afternoon at Sunrise Senior Living in Charlotte, pretending I was some kind of saint for volunteering when really I was just escaping the suffocating corporate walls of Right Financial Services. Vanessa dear, what's a 6-letter word for intense attraction? Mrs. Patterson squinted at her puzzle through glasses thick as bottle bottoms. Desire, I answered without thinking, then immediately felt my cheeks flush. At 35, you'd think I'd be past blushing like a teenager. That's when I saw her, elegantly dressed in a cream silk blouse that seemed to catch the afternoon light just right. Her brunette hair cascaded in soft waves past her shoulders, and those green eyes. Damn those eyes. I'd seen her in photographs on Robert Wright's desk, of course, but those family portraits did Genevieve Wright zero justice. She moved through the senior center like she belonged there, stopping to chat with residents, her smile genuine in a way her husband's never was. Robert Wright was all business, all the time, cold, calculating, and mercilessly effective at making money. How he managed to marry someone who radiated such warmth was beyond my comprehension. You must be one of our new volunteers, she said, approaching our table. Her voice had a husky quality that made my stomach do a little flip. I'm General Vanessa Taylor, I managed, standing awkwardly and knocking my knee against the table. I work for your husband, actually. Ah. Something flickered across her expression, disappointment maybe. Another one of Robert's employees doing mandatory community service hours? No, this is just me. I like it here. Why was I suddenly defensive, and why did it matter what this woman thought of me? Good, she said simply. Too many people come once for the corporate photo op and never return. We might have stood there staring at each other forever if Mr. Jenkins hadn't called out from across the room. The old man was struggling with his pill organizer, tiny white tablets scattered across his lap. We both moved to help him at the same time, our hands colliding over the spilled medication. Her fingers were cool against mine, soft in a way that suggested regular moisturizing and a life free from spreadsheets and keyboard calluses. Something electric passed between us, so cliché, I know, but there it was, a current, a connection, a complication. I've got this, she murmured, not pulling her hand away immediately. You sure? I asked, noticing a wedding ring that probably cost more than my annual salary. Been doing this for years. My grandmother's in the memory care wing, she explained, finally breaking contact to help Mr. Jenkins. I watched her methodically sort his medications, speaking to him with patience and dignity, rather than the condescending baby talk so many used with the elderly. This wasn't the trophy wife I'd imagined from office gossip. This was someone with depth, someone who cared. Same time next week? She asked as I gathered my things to leave. Every Tuesday, I confirmed, suddenly looking forward to my volunteer shift in a way I never had before. Good, she said again, this time with a smile that reached those forest green eyes. This place needs more people who actually want to be here. Walking to my car, I tried to shake off the strange feeling in my chest. It was admiration, surely. Just appreciation for someone who shared my commitment to community service. Nothing more. But lying to myself has never been my strong suit. And as I drove home through the Charlotte evening, the memory of her fingers against mine replayed in my mind like a song stuck on repeat. I was in trouble, and I knew it. The next few weeks at Sunrise Senior Living became the highlight of my otherwise monotonous existence. I found myself putting more effort into my appearance on Tuesdays, trading sensible office attire for more flattering options, even brushing on mascara that normally stayed reserved for client meetings. You know my Robert? Mrs. Wright Sr. asked me one afternoon while I helped her arrange family photos. The resemblance between her and her son was striking. Same cold blue eyes, same calculating gaze. I work in his accounting department, I replied, carefully positioning a silver-framed wedding portrait of Robert and Genevieve. They looked like magazine models, him stern and commanding, her smiling but somehow distant. And you know my daughter-in-law too, I see. The old woman's eyes were shrewd. She comes every day, you know. Every single day while my son is too busy making money to visit his own mother. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just nodded sympathetically. Genevieve deserved better, she continued, adjusting her blanket with gnarled fingers. But don't tell her I said that. Later that afternoon, dark clouds rolled in over Charlotte, bringing a sudden summer thunderstorm that rattled the windows of the senior center. I found Genevieve in the garden gazebo, watching the rain come down in sheets. "Mind some company?" I asked, stepping under the wooden shelter. She scooted over on the bench, making room. "I love thunderstorms. They make everything feel cleansed afterward." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching lightning split the sky. She seemed different today, more subdued, less the perfect corporate wife. "How long have you been married?" I asked, immediately regretting the intrusion. 8 years, she answered, twisting her wedding ring. "But it feels like 80 sometimes." "I'm sorry," I murmured, not knowing what else to say. "Don't be. I made my choices." She turned to face me fully. "What about you? Anyone special?" I shook my head. My last relationship ended 2 years ago. She couldn't handle my work schedule. I froze, realizing I'd just outed myself. In the corporate world of Right Financial, I kept my personal life carefully separated. But Genevieve didn't even blink at my pronoun use. "Robert works until midnight most days," she said, her voice barely audible above the rain. "Sometimes I think he married me just to check trophy wife off his life achievements list." The confession hung between us as lightning illuminated her face. In that flash, I saw something raw and honest, a loneliness that mirrored my own. "I don't think anyone who really knows you would see you that way," I said carefully. Her eyes met mine, searching. Then slowly, deliberately, she moved closer until our shoulders touched. My breath caught as she rested her head against me, her perfume mingling with the smell of rain and wet earth. "Thank you for seeing me, Vanessa," she whispered. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, watching the storm, neither of us willing to break the spell by speaking again. Her hand found mine in the dim light of the gazebo, fingers intertwining with a gentle pressure that said everything words couldn't. When the rain finally slowed to a drizzle, reality came crashing back. She straightened up, smoothed her skirt, and became Mrs. Wright again before my eyes. "I should check on my grandmother," she said, standing up. But at the gazebo steps, she turned back. For one heart-stopping moment, I thought she might kiss me. Instead, she reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my face, her fingertips lingering against my cheek. "Same time next week?" she asked, an echo of our first meeting. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I watched her walk away through the glistening garden, I knew I was falling for someone I could never have. The wife of the man who signed my paychecks, a woman who represented every possible complication. And damn if that didn't make me want her even more. Tuesday became my religion. I found myself counting hours, minutes, seconds, until I could walk through those sliding doors at Sunrise Senior Living. Every week I told myself this madness had to stop, and every week I failed spectacularly at following my own advice. "You're glowing lately," my coworker Taylor remarked over lunch. "Either you're using new skincare or you've met someone." I stabbed at my salad. "Just enjoying the summer." "Bullshit." "Who is she?" I shook my head. "There's no one." But there was someone. Someone who texted me pictures of clouds that looked like animals. Someone who remembered how I took my coffee. Someone married to our damn boss. Week after week, Genevieve and I orchestrated accidental meetings at the senior center. We'd volunteer for the same activities, take breaks at the same time, find reasons to shuffle residents' schedules so our visits overlapped. The staff began greeting us as a pair. "There's our Tuesday girls," and neither of us corrected them. Our quiet moments together accumulated like treasures, her hand brushing mine when passing craft supplies, our shoulders touching as we read to Mr. Jenkins. Walks to the parking lot that took 3 times longer than necessary. "They're celebrating the center's 10th anniversary next week," Genevieve mentioned as we watered the garden one Tuesday. "There's going to be dancing." "I have 2 left feet," I warned. "Then I'll have to lead," she replied with a smile that haunted me for days afterward. The night of the anniversary party, the recreation room was transformed with twinkling lights and streamers. Residents in their finest clothes mingled with families and staff. I wore a blue dress I'd bought specifically for this night, something that made me feel pretty for the first time in years. When Genevieve walked in wearing a simple black dress that hugged every curve, the punch cup nearly slipped from my hand. She looked like she'd stepped straight from my dreams into this fluorescent-lit reality. "You came," she said, reaching for my free hand. "Wouldn't miss it." Most of the evening we helped residents navigate the buffet line or find seats, exchanging glances across the room like conspirators. It was only when the DJ played an old Sinatra tune, and most attendees were occupied with cake, that she appeared at my side. "Dance with me?" she whispered. "People will see. Not here." She led me down the hall to the dim physical therapy room. The music drifted in faintly, just enough to give us rhythm. Without a word, her arms slipped around my waist, and mine found her shoulders. We swayed together in the half-darkness, her cheek against mine, our bodies speaking a language our voices dared not. Her perfume, something with jasmine and vanilla, filled my senses until I felt drunk with it. "I think about you," she confessed against my ear. "All the time. General, we can't." "I know." But knowing didn't stop us from dancing closer, didn't prevent her fingers from tracing patterns on my back, didn't keep my heart from nearly exploding when she looked at me with those forest green eyes full of want. The song changed to something more upbeat, breaking our trance momentarily. We should have returned to the party. Instead, Genevieve took my hand and pulled me toward the supply closet, her intentions crystal clear. "Someone might come looking," I protested weakly. "Let them." The closet was small and smelled of cleaning products. She closed the door behind us, plunging us into darkness save for the sliver of light beneath the door. For a moment we stood frozen, the magnitude of what we were contemplating hanging between us. "We can walk away," I whispered, giving her an out we both needed but neither wanted. Her answer was to find my face with her hands, thumbs gently tracing my cheekbones. The first brush of her lips against mine was hesitant, questioning. The second was anything but. Years of longing, weeks of tension, dissolved in that kiss. Her mouth was soft, insistent, tasting faintly of the champagne punch. My hands found her hair, pulling her closer as she backed me against the shelving. Supply bottles rattled precariously. "Vanessa," she breathed against my lips. My name had never sounded so perfect. We broke apart at the sound of footsteps in the hall, reality crashing back like a bucket of ice water. Straightening our clothes, checking for smeared lipstick, we transformed back into volunteer and boss's wife before slipping out separately. But everything had changed. We'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and God help me, all I wanted was to cross it again and again. The universe has a sick sense of humor. 1 week after kissing his wife in a supply closet, I found myself sitting across from Robert Wright himself as he outlined my new position. "Vanessa, your work in accounts receivable has been exceptional. I'm moving you directly under me as special projects accountant." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Under you, sir?" "Effective immediately. 20% salary increase." He didn't smile. Robert never smiled, but satisfaction radiated from his steel blue eyes. "We'll be working closely together. Late nights, weekend availability required." All I could think about was Genevieve's perfume, the softness of her lips, the way she'd whispered my name in that closet. And now here I sat, accepting a promotion from her husband. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. "Thank you, Mr. Wright, I'm honored." "Robert," he corrected. "We'll be spending too much time together for formalities." I nodded, feeling the walls of my ethical boundaries crumbling around me. How could I continue whatever was happening with Genevieve while working side by side with her husband? The answer was simple: I couldn't, I shouldn't. But that conviction lasted exactly 3 hours and 27 minutes, until my doorbell rang that evening. Genevieve stood in my hallway holding a bottle of wine and a bag of takeout. "Congratulations on the promotion," she said, brushing past me into my apartment before I could process what was happening. "How did you know?" "Robert mentioned it at dinner." She moved through my space like she belonged there, finding wine glasses, plates, setting them out on my cramped kitchen counter. "He says you're brilliant." "General, we need to talk about—" "I know." She paused, vulnerability flashing across her face. "But can we just have tonight, before we decide it's impossible?" She'd brought Thai food, my favorite, and opened a Cabernet that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. We ate sitting on floor cushions around my coffee table, trading stories about our lives before we met. She'd been an art history major with dreams of museum curation before meeting Robert at a charity gala. I told her about growing up with a single mother who worked 3 jobs, about clawing my way through accounting school on scholarships and sheer stubbornness. "You amaze me," she said, refilling our glasses. You built your life on your own terms. I laughed bitterly. Says the woman living in a mansion. In a museum, she corrected. A perfect, sterile, loveless museum where everything is for display and nothing is to be touched. Her words hung between us, an invitation I shouldn't accept. But then she set down her wine glass and moved beside me on the couch, her thigh pressing against mine. I haven't felt real in years, she whispered. Not until you. When she kissed me, it wasn't the frantic, stolen moment from the closet. It was deliberate, a choice being made with full awareness of consequences. My hands found her hair, her waist, the curve of her hip. Hers worked at the buttons of my blouse with determined precision. Are you sure? I managed to ask between kisses. Her answer was to stand and offer her hand, leading me toward my own bedroom. What followed was everything I'd imagined in my most private thoughts and so much more. Her skin like silk beneath my fingers. Her sighs in my ear, the way she arched when I touched her just right. We explored each other with the wonder of new territory and the desperation of borrowed time, collapsing finally into breathless laughter and tangled limbs. Stay, I murmured as she nestled against my shoulder. Until morning, she promised. Then reality comes back. But reality crashed in earlier than expected. My alarm blared at 5:30 a.m., and I stumbled to the shower in a happy daze only to remember I had a 7 a.m. meeting with Robert Wright to discuss quarterly projections I hadn't reviewed because I'd been too busy making love to his wife. Genevieve was still asleep in my bed, her hair spread across my pillow, wearing nothing but my oversized t-shirt. I watched her for a moment, knowing I should feel guilty, but finding only a fierce protectiveness instead. As I dressed in my most severe business suit, applying makeup to cover the evidence of too little sleep, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me had crossed a line she could never uncross. There would be consequences, there had to be. But something in her eyes told me she'd make the same choice again. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like the first honest decision I'd made in years. 2 months of dangerous happiness followed. Genevieve and I established a delicate balance, weekday evenings when Robert worked late, occasional weekends when he traveled for business. We became experts at coded text messages and plausible explanations. The only place we felt truly free was my small apartment, our sanctuary from the outside world. Working directly with Robert was psychological torture. He'd discuss acquisition strategies while I'd remember the sound of his wife's laughter in my kitchen. He'd compliment my financial models while I'd recall how Genevieve had whispered my name in the darkness. The duplicity was eating me alive, yet I couldn't stop. I was addicted to her, to us, to the fragile world we'd created. I need to tell someone before I explode, I confessed one Sunday morning as we lounged in bed. Just one person who knows about us. Genevieve traced patterns on my bare shoulder, considering. Who? My friend Taylor. She's known me forever. Completely trustworthy. After much discussion, Genevieve agreed. Taylor had been asking increasingly pointed questions about my sudden unavailability and mysterious good mood. A partial truth seemed safer than continued evasion. The following weekend, I arranged for us to meet at a small gallery in Noda, Charlotte's arts district. Taylor arrived first, eyebrows raising when I walked in with Genevieve. Taylor, this is General, I said carefully. She's someone special to me. To her credit, Taylor didn't flinch when recognition dawned. Mrs. Wright, she said evenly. Interesting. Just General Aviv, please, Jen replied, extending her hand. The tension was palpable until Taylor finally smiled. Any friend of Vanessa's, she conceded. Especially a special one. We spent the afternoon viewing experimental photography exhibits, Taylor gradually warming to Genevieve as they discovered shared tastes in art and literature. By the time we left the gallery, the three of us were laughing like old friends. Want to grab dinner? Taylor suggested. I glanced at Genevieve, who nodded. Somewhere quiet? I know just the place. The freedom of being out together, not hiding in my apartment or pretending to be casual acquaintances, was intoxicating. Walking through Noda's colorful streets, Genevieve tentatively took my hand. I froze momentarily, then intertwined my fingers with hers, heart racing. Such a simple gesture, yet it felt revolutionary. You two are disgustingly cute, Taylor observed. But her smile was genuine. How long has this been going on? 2 months, we answered simultaneously, then laughed. And Robert? The question sobered us instantly. Genevieve's grip tightened on my hand. It's complicated, I offered lamely. Taylor gave me her patented you-know-better look but mercifully dropped the subject. We continued toward the restaurant, our momentary bubble of normalcy restored. That's when I heard them. 3 men stumbling out of a bar ahead, clearly intoxicated despite the early hour. They were loud, aggressive, taking up the entire sidewalk. I moved to guide us around them when one noticed our joined hands. Well, look at this, he slurred, nudging his companions. Got ourselves some dykes. I felt Genevieve stiffen beside me but kept walking, pulling her forward. Taylor moved protectively to our other side. Ignore them, I murmured. Hey, I'm talking to you. The largest man stepped directly into our path. Your kind make me sick. Back off, Taylor warned. Just let us pass. Or what? His breath reeked of whiskey and hatred. You gonna call your girlfriend squad? It happened so quickly. He shoved me backward, sending me stumbling into Genevieve. Taylor moved to intervene, only to receive an elbow to her face. Genevieve tried to pull me away, but the second man grabbed her arm. Let go of her, I shouted, lunging forward. Pain exploded in my temple as something, a fist, a bottle, I couldn't tell, connected with my head. I heard Genevieve scream, saw Taylor wrestling with one of the men. A crowd was gathering, someone shouting about calling police. I struggled to my feet just as the largest attacker pushed Genevieve hard against a brick wall. The sound of her head hitting the masonry triggered something primal in me. I charged him despite my dizziness, catching him off guard enough to knock him sideways. Run! Taylor yelled, blood streaming from her nose. But it was too late. The third man swung wildly, catching me across the face. I felt something crack in my wrist as I hit the pavement. Through blurred vision, I saw Genevieve crumpled nearby, a crowd finally intervening to subdue our attackers. Sirens wailed in the distance. Genevieve's usually perfect hair was matted with blood where she'd hit the wall. Her eyes found mine across the pavement, filled with pain and something else, determination, defiance. Stay with me, I whispered, reaching for her despite the stabbing pain in my wrist. Her bloodied fingers stretched toward mine, as darkness closed in around my vision. I woke to the sterile smell of hospital disinfectant and the steady beep of monitors. My left arm was immobilized in a cast, and my head throbbed with each heartbeat. The nurse explained I had a broken wrist and a mild concussion. Lucky, she said, considering what could have happened. Where is she? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Who, honey? Genevieve. The woman who was with me. The nurse's expression softened. Next bed over. We put you two together once we realized you came in from the same incident. She pulled back the privacy curtain to reveal Genevieve in the adjacent hospital bed. My breath caught painfully in my chest. Her face was swollen, a line of neat stitches running along her hairline. Her normally vibrant eyes were closed, dark lashes stark against too pale skin. Is she stable? Concussion worse than yours. Some facial lacerations. She'll need monitoring. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by guilt. This was my fault. If I hadn't insisted on going out, on telling Taylor, on holding her hand in public. She's been asking for you, the nurse added. Every time she wakes up. That broke me. Tears I'd been holding back since the attack finally spilled over. The nurse patted my shoulder sympathetically before leaving us alone. General, I called softly. Can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered, then opened slowly. Those green eyes found mine, and she attempted a smile that clearly caused her pain. There you are, she whispered. I'm so sorry, I choked out. This is all my fault. She shook her head minutely, then winced at the movement. Don't you dare. But if we hadn't. No. Her voice was stronger now, determined despite her injuries. Their hatred is not our responsibility. We fell silent, the gravity of what had happened settling over us. Hospital noises continued around us, the squeak of nurse shoes, distant announcements, the hum of equipment keeping track of our damaged bodies. Can you reach me? She finally asked. I turned carefully, extending my uninjured arm across the space between our beds. She did the same, our fingertips barely touching. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Taylor? She questioned. Treated and released. broken nose. She texted that she's coming back to check on us later. Genevieve nodded slightly. Good. The day passed in a haze of pain medication, police statements, and medical examinations. No one questioned why we wanted to remain in the same room, or why I was listed as Genevieve's emergency contact rather than her husband. Small mercies. That evening, a nurse helped me into a wheelchair so I could sit properly beside Genevieve's bed. We shared the unappetizing hospital dinner from her tray, me awkwardly managing with my right hand, her struggling to sit upright without triggering waves of dizziness. Let me, I said, spearing a piece of mystery meat and bringing it to her lips. She accepted my offering, and I wiped a drop of sauce from the corner of her mouth. Such an intimate gesture, born of necessity but feeling like a declaration. We match, she said, gently touching my bandaged temple that mirrored her own injuries. Battle scars. Worth it. Her eyes held mine steadily. Every second with you has been worth it. I fed her another bite, emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Even this? Even this. She caught my hand in hers. Maybe especially this. That's the concussion talking. No. She closed her eyes briefly, summoning strength. I've been living half a life, Vanessa, pretending to be someone I'm not in a marriage that exists only on paper. It took getting my head cracked open to see clearly. My heart hammered against my ribs. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm done pretending. I'm leaving Robert. The words hung in the air between us, both terrifying and exhilarating. I knew what this would mean: scandal, financial uncertainty, potential career implosion for me. But looking at her battered face, her unwavering determination, none of that seemed to matter. Are you sure? I asked, needing her to be certain. She answered by pulling me closer, ignoring her IV lines and my awkward cast, and placing the softest kiss on my lips. It tasted of hospital jello and promise. More sure than I've ever been about anything, she whispered against my mouth. Life's too short and too precious to waste another day. The door opened then, a doctor entering to check Genevieve's vitals. We didn't jump apart, didn't scramble to hide what we were to each other. Something fundamental had shifted in that sterile hospital room. We were done hiding. We should have known the calm wouldn't last. 3 days into our hospital stay, the door to our shared room burst open with such force that the handle left a dent in the wall. Robert Wright stood in the doorway, his normally impeccable appearance disheveled, eyes wild with a cocktail of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. What the hell is going on? He demanded, gaze darting between Genevieve's injuries and my protective position at her bedside. We'd been playing gin rummy with cards Taylor had brought, my cast-covered arm awkwardly holding my hand while Genevieve kept score. The domestic scene clearly told him everything he needed to know. Robert, Genevieve said calmly, though I felt her fingers tremble against mine. I was going to call you today. Really? Because your mother-in-law had to hear from her nurse that her daughter-in-law was attacked with. He glanced at me with undisguised contempt, her accountant. Mr. Wright, I started, professional habit kicking in despite everything. Don't. He cut me off with a slashing gesture. I trusted you with company finances, with confidential information, with a position in my inner circle. This isn't about Vanessa, Genevieve interrupted, her voice stronger than I'd heard since the attack. This is about us, Robert. About our marriage. About the fact that we've been strangers living in the same house for years. His face reddened. So you decided to work through our issues by sleeping with my employee? By humiliating me throughout Charlotte's business community? No one knows, I said. Everyone knows, he shouted. Your little outing in Noda made the local news. CEO's wife assaulted in hate crime. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. Genevieve paled but held her ground. I'm sorry you found out this way. It wasn't what we planned. Planned? He laughed bitterly. You've been planning this? Not the attack, I clarified, anger beginning to replace my initial shock. But yes, Genevieve was going to tell you. About us. About wanting a divorce. The word hung in the air like a live grenade. Robert's expression shifted from rage to calculation in the blink of an eye, the businessman replacing the betrayed husband. A divorce. He straightened his tie, visibly collecting himself. You understand what you're giving up, General? The house, the lifestyle, the social standing? I understand exactly what I'm choosing, she replied, reaching for my hand again. He noticed the gesture, his eyes narrowing. "And you, Vanessa, you understand what this means professionally? No firm in Charlotte will touch you after this. You'll be blacklisted from every financial institution in the Southeast." The threat landed exactly as intended, ice flooding my veins. My career, everything I'd worked for, gone in an instant. But looking at Genevieve, her face still bruised but her expression resolute, I found my voice. "Then I'll move. We'll move. There's more to life than Charlotte." Bold words from someone who grew up with nothing, he sneered. "We'll see how long your passion lasts when you're struggling to pay rent." "Get out," Genevieve said quietly. When he didn't move, she repeated it louder. "Get out, Robert, now." A nurse appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. "Is there a problem here? These patients need rest." Robert smoothed his expression into corporate politeness. "No problem. I was just leaving." At the door, he turned back. "Expect my attorney's call, General. I won't make this easy." After he left, I collapsed back into the visitor's chair, my injured wrist throbbing in time with my racing heart. Genevieve's face had gone ashen. "He's right," I whispered. "I'll never work in finance here again. Are you having second thoughts?" Her voice was small, vulnerable in a way that broke my heart. I moved to perch carefully on the edge of her bed, mindful of her IV lines. "About you? Never. About the challenges ahead? Honestly, yes." She nodded slowly. "I have money of my own. From before Robert. Not a fortune, but enough to start over." "I don't want your money," I insisted. "I want a partnership." "Then we'll figure it out together." She traced the edge of my cast with gentle fingers. "One day at a time." The hospital room felt smaller suddenly, the future simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. Everything was about to change. My career, her marriage, our lives completely upended. Yet sitting there, holding her hand amid the antiseptic smells and fluorescent lighting, I felt more certain than I had in years. Come what may, we would face it together. The October afternoon I helped Genevieve move into my apartment was surreal. 3 suitcases and 5 cardboard boxes, the sum total of what she'd taken from her former life. The divorce proceedings had begun, ugly and contentious as Robert had promised, but at least she was here now, away from the coldness of that mansion. "Is this really enough space for your clothes?" I joked, eyeing my modest closet as she hung designer dresses next to my practical office wear. "You'd be surprised what you can live without," she replied, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly as she arranged her toiletries in the bathroom we'd now share. The reality of our situation hit in waves. I'd lost my job, as predicted. Robert had made certain no financial firm would touch me, spreading rumors of embezzlement and ethical violations that, while untrue, were enough to make me unemployable in my field. Genevieve had walked away from a life of luxury into my 1-bedroom apartment with its temperamental plumbing and noisy neighbors. "Having regrets?" I asked that evening, as we sat among half-unpacked boxes, eating takeout pizza directly from the box. She considered the question, taking her time before answering. "I miss certain comforts," she admitted, "but not enough to trade this for that empty life." She gestured around our humble living room. "This feels real. You feel real." That first week was an adjustment. She'd never operated a coin laundry machine, never calculated if she had enough cash for groceries until payday. I'd never shared my space so completely with another person, never had to consider someone else's routines and preferences in my daily life. But there were beautiful discoveries, too. Genevieve singing in the shower, her voice surprisingly melodious. The way she arranged flowers from the corner bodega to bring life to my apartment. How she curled against me while sleeping, fitting perfectly into the curves of my body. I found contract work through Taylor's connections, nothing permanent, nothing in finance, but enough to keep us afloat while Genevieve began exploring opportunities in museum education. Our life was smaller now, confined to fewer square feet and tighter budgets, but somehow infinitely larger in possibility. "Let's create new traditions," Genevieve suggested one Sunday morning as we lingered over coffee. "Things that are just ours." So began our Sunday ritual, homemade breakfast followed by a walk through Freedom Park, regardless of weather. We started collecting quirky mugs from thrift stores, one for each month we were together. Small traditions, tiny anchors in our new shared life. As autumn deepened, the leaves turning brilliant shades of crimson and gold, Genevieve received her first paycheck from the Community Art Center where she'd found work teaching children's classes. We celebrated with a bottle of wine that cost exactly 1/10 what she used to spend without thinking. To financial independence, she toasted, clinking her glass against mine. To new beginnings, I countered. That night, with rain pattering against the windows and the first real chill of fall in the air, our love-making took on a new dimension. The desperate passion of our early secret encounters had evolved into something deeper, a physical conversation between two people building a life together despite every obstacle. Her fingers traced the now faded scar at my temple, a souvenir from the attack that had changed everything. My lips followed the healed line of stitches at her hairline. Our bodies remembered the pain but transformed it into tenderness, creating something beautiful from the broken pieces. I never want to forget this feeling, she whispered against my skin as we moved together in the darkness, her body arching beneath mine. Later, tangled in sheets in each other, we planned a weekend getaway to the mountains, a tiny cabin near Asheville, nothing fancy but away from Charlotte and its judgments, away from the divorce proceedings and job rejections. Just us and the trees, Genevieve murmured sleepily. No past, no complications. The following Friday, we loaded my aging Honda with backpacks and groceries, a weekend's worth of freedom awaiting us in the Blue Ridge Mountains. As Charlotte's skyline receded in the rearview mirror, I felt Genevieve's hand slip into mine on the center console. No regrets? I asked, glancing at her profile against the backdrop of passing scenery. She smiled, the autumn sunlight catching in her hair. Not a single one. Spring arrived in Charlotte, bringing renewal that mirrored our own lives 6 months after everything changed. The divorce was finally settled, Robert ultimately more concerned with appearances than vengeance. Genevieve had received a modest settlement, enough to give us breathing room while I established my new career as an independent bookkeeper for small businesses. Ready for this? Genevieve asked, squeezing my hand as we approached the familiar automatic doors of Sunrise Senior Living. I nodded, though my stomach churned with anxiety. We hadn't been back since everything happened, since our relationship became public knowledge, since the attack, since our lives were completely restructured. Mrs. Wright Sr.'s birthday celebration had drawn us back. Despite Robert's objections, she had insisted on seeing Genevieve, and by extension, me. The old woman had surprised everyone by being completely unfazed by the scandal. Robert was always too concerned with appearances, she'd told Genevieve during their phone conversations. Besides, you're still my daughter-in-law until those papers are signed. The staff welcomed us warmly, many exclaiming over how well we both looked compared to our last public appearance, in hospital beds with matching head injuries. If there were whispers about us, the scandal that had rocked Charlotte's business community, they didn't reach our ears. There are my Tuesday girls, Mr. Jenkins called from his usual spot, though it was Saturday and we hadn't been Tuesday girls for months. The recreation room was decorated with balloons and streamers for the birthday celebration. In the corner, Mrs. Wright Sr. held court from her wheelchair, imperious as ever despite her advancing years. About time, she declared when we approached. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten how to find the place. Happy birthday, Margaret, Genevieve said, bending to kiss her cheek. The old woman grasped my hand with surprising strength. So you're the one who finally gave my daughter-in-law some backbone. Good. She needed it. I laughed, tension draining from my shoulders. She had plenty of backbone, I just provided the opportunity. The afternoon passed pleasantly, the familiar rhythms of the senior center wrapping around us like a comfortable sweater. We helped serve cake, joined in singing happy birthday, caught up with residents we'd grown to care for during our volunteer days. Later, as residents began returning to their rooms for afternoon rest, Margaret Wright motioned us closer to her wheelchair. I have something for you two, she said, removing a small velvet pouch from her cardigan pocket. Been holding on to these for decades. She emptied 2 rings into Genevieve's palm, delicate bands of intertwining gold and silver, clearly antique, clearly valuable. These were my grandmother's, then my mother's. Never felt right giving them to Robert's bride until now. Her sharp blue eyes, so like her son's yet somehow warmer, fixed on us. Consider it my blessing. Genevieve's eyes filled with tears. Margaret, we can't. Course you can. I'm old, not blind. I see how you look at each other. She patted Genevieve's hand. Use them as you see fit. We left the senior center in stunned silence, the weight of the rings in Genevieve's purse both physical and metaphorical. Neither of us spoke until we reached the garden gazebo, where, all those months ago, we'd first allowed ourselves to acknowledge what was growing between us. "Full circle," I murmured, taking a seat on the weathered bench. Genevieve joined me, drawing the velvet pouch from her purse. "What do you think she meant? Use them as you see fit." I think she was being deliberately ambiguous. The spring air was sweet with flowering trees and new possibilities. Through the gazebo's latticed walls, I could see senior center residents watching from the windows, including Margaret herself. "I never imagined this," Genevieve said softly, opening the pouch and examining the rings. "Any of this. Losing everything I thought defined me, and gaining everything that actually matters." She placed one ring in my palm, closing my fingers over it. The metal was warm from her touch. "Whatever these symbolize, friendship, commitment, a promise, I want to wear one if you'll wear the other," she said. I examined her face, the laugh lines that had deepened over our months together, the small scar at her hairline that matched my own, the certainty in her green eyes. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Her smile was radiant. "I'm asking if you'll promise me the future, whatever it looks like." With trembling fingers, I slipped the ring onto her left hand, and she did the same for me. Simple as that, profound as everything. Behind us, a small cheer rose from the senior center windows. "Always our biggest fans," I laughed, nodding toward our elderly audience. "To new beginnings," Genevieve said, echoing our toast from months ago. As her lips met mine beneath the gazebo where our story began, I knew with absolute certainty that sometimes losing everything was the only way to find what matters most.